So can I call on stage Dr. Farhad Hafezi, Dr. Damien, and Dr. Rohit Shetty, who would be conducting.
So we can start with Damien first.
So I think this is, both of you are very emphatic about your standpoints on this. Dr. Gatinel doesn't believe in cross-linking, and he feels that just stopping eye rubbing is the answer. And Dr. Hafezi, of course, has been one of the pioneers in cross-linking. So let's see, what are your opening statements about cross-linking? Why do you think it's not a hype and it's a reality, and why do you think it's a hype?
Well, I think if we were in the year 1999, I would have to explain why it's not a hype, but after 19 years of clinical application, far more than 1,000 Medline publications, and the fact that in the two countries that have a registry for keratoplasty, the Netherlands and England, and they have both published that the number of keratoplasties has dropped by 30 to 50% in the past 10 years. I think it's rather on Damien to explain to us why it's a hype.
Yeah, well, for me, I would say that I'm not saying that I don't think believing or not believing makes sense in this kind of field, because cross-linking exists. It's a widespread procedure, and I'm not like putting any skepticism on the fact that it has stabilized some people. My point is that you have techniques sometimes which work in a way which is not the intended way. Because I have one question for you in the audience that you may not have thought about. That is, what is cross-linking? Elementary speaking, it's creating covalent bonds, and it's usually to make any material more rigid, right? If you use cross-linking in the dental art for teeth, fixing, etc., all dentists will tell you that cross-linking works right away and stops when they remove the pedal of the UV light. And my question to you, Farhad, is why is that you have to wait 3 to 6 months to see something happening? And I would then rephrase that cross-linking is not cross-linking per se, but it's a mechanism of wound healing which is induced by an inflammatory reaction caused by a photochemical trauma to the corneal stroma. It's a very long explanation, but that's how I see it. Now, to say if it's useful or not, I think, of course, if, for example, if it makes the eye less sensitive to eye rubbing, and or if the eye is painful and it creates like a conscious awareness that you shouldn't touch your eye anymore, that's perfect. Let's do it, you know? But then why do you have to wait 3 to 6 months? Because it should work right now. I mean, it's a photochemical reaction which is immediate.
Well, first of all, we all know that in the lab you can have an immediate effect that can be measured, but you're talking about the clinical condition. And what I really liked about this talk is that it forced me to rethink my own arguments, because your hypothesis is quite provocative, which is good. First of all, Damien, medicine is, and science is full of examples where for years, even decades, we have been applying things we had not the slightest clue why they work, but we know that they work. So in all due respect, I do not care how do you call it, as long as the effect is there and what you postulate behind. Let's give you a few examples. I had to look it up. Modern physics is based on Einstein's theory of gravitational waves, postulated in 1916, proven 100 years later. The Higgs boson was proven in 2014 at CERN in Geneva, received the Nobel Prize 1 year later. The theory behind it comes from 1967. So we all are used to have decades of something that seems to be the case, and then it needs a final proof that comes way later. So I think this is where we are standing with cross-linking. As we do with many other things, we know that there is a mechanism behind it. Oh, another example. Do you use paracetamol in your clinic?
Yeah, we do sometimes, of course. Why? Because it's a placebo.
No, if you go into literature, into any review, it will tell you, to date, the energetic mechanism of paracetamol has not been elucidated. We do not know why it works, and we've been using it for decades.
No, but we agree. Then what I'm saying from the beginning, since this cross-linking story, because I can tell you my skepticism is long. In 2006, some people in France were doing the first cross-linking studies, and they didn't have the ORS system, you know, the ocular response analyzer. So they sent me the patient to be measured before and after. And after, you wouldn't see anything. It was usually worst, not equal. Yeah, because of course, you create inflammation, maybe, you know, so the surface was a little more irregular. So I was sending the data back, and they were not pleased. And my point was that, okay, now we don't see any more rigidity, which is the first goal of this procedure. We should maybe revise the procedure. But they concluded completely differently, say, your instrument doesn't work. I think, is this scientific? Are we, as doctors, should we go this way? And taking the paracetamol is exactly a good example. It's like you expect the fever of someone to go down. So you have a thermometer, you measure it, 38.5 Celsius, take the paracetamol, measure it, 38.6, 38.4. Oh, your thermometer doesn't work. That's what I received at that time. So since then, I'm not saying you should do or not do cross-linking. I mean, that's not the, but we should more focus on how it works, because as you say, you know, Einstein started his thinking because at that time, the theory of space and things did not predict what was observed. And that's exactly why, in the same vein that you are explaining, we should revise the understanding of cross-linking instead of waiting any confirmation of a hypothetical effect, because what we may find is that it may work in some ways which are not due to any reticulation, which has never been demonstrated, by the way, really, and for a clinical evidence of strengthening, which has never been demonstrated in vivo. Of course, in vitro cross-linking works. My shoes are cross-linked, leather is cross-linked, but in vivo, it's not achieving that goal. It may achieve satellite goals, some of them desirable in this context, but not the rigidity.
This is something I want you to see. Why aren't we not getting this?
In vivo, because in vitro it works.
I think this would have been true, and everything that Damien has just said would be valid until Giuliano Scarselli. Your argument is that we don't have technology sensitive enough to pick up the signal, and you're right with the aura, you're probably right with the corvis. But again, what we have discussed before in physics was that for many years we had a valid theory, a whole construct based on it, and it took time to prove it. Same thing here. Now we have Brilliant microscopy, and we can measure in vivo the effect that you wanted. I suggest you revise your Defeat Keratoconus. Very nice website, by the way. But you have to revise your whole thinking, because you base it on the mechanism cannot be, the effect cannot be measured. That's not true anymore. With Brilliant microscopy, we can measure humans
well, I was
in vivo.
at ARVO and
we just showed that LASIK Extra does not work.
Yes.
And you say that the effect cannot be measured and the mechanism is not elucidated, and I gave you a bunch of explanations in other fields of science. The third one you mentioned, I had to read your very interesting keratoconus sine qua non. You said there is no Cochrane review on keratoconus. That's the reason why, on cross-linking, that's the reason you shouldn't do it.
There is one. There is one.
There is a review that says it's negative. Exactly. Now, anybody doing plastic and reconstructive surgery in the room?
Oculoplasty surgeons.
Oculoplastics? Yeah. You should stop exerting your profession because there is not a single Cochrane review on the effectiveness of your surgeries. There is one on acupuncture effect on sty, though. You may continue treating styes with acupuncture. So you have to bring up better arguments.
I just wanted to ask one question to Dr. Gatinel. Let's say you have a patient with keratoconus and you advise him to stop eye rubbing, and he follows your instruction, no eye rubbing. And you follow up and you find there is progression. What do you do for that patient?
But that never happens. No, but this is why we put that website, because how can I convince people? I mean, I'm not crazy. I don't need cross-linking to be famous. I have many other things in my thing. No, I created the first trifocal IOL. With this, I'm happy for the rest of my career, right? So if I'm here standing trying to convince people, and I know I'm swimming against the flow, I know that. But again, to me, I'm a simple mind. I'm very simple. You have a procedure which is made just for making a tissue stiffer. There's no way to demonstrate any stiffening, but the instruments you use are very good to demonstrate stiffening. You do a LASIK, pre and post ORA system, signals will show you that something happened. You do a PTK for 10 microns, sometimes it's even showed on the Corvis or ORA, right? So why the instrument, which is stupid, would go against the error of time? That is, if you make a cornea stiffer, it wouldn't show it. That's all I'm saying. So my point is not do or not do cross-linking. I don't do it, of course, because first, patients who stop rubbing, they don't progress, and the website shows it clearly, because I don't want to lose my reputation and my job at Rothschild. Suppose, like I said, when those parents with their children come to me, and when I advise them not to do cross-linking, but come back whenever they want to do the difference map, if they would progress, how would I look like? Stupid? My residents are there, my fellow are there. We have a fellow in common, you know, Emilio, he tells you probably what happens in Rothschild. What happens to me is the opposite. I can show testimonial of parents thanking me for being the first to interview their child, to ask about the sleeping position, the atopy history, send them to ocular surface specialists, because what Roy does is very important. You need to control ocular surface inflammation, blepharitis, meibomian gland dysfunction. All these things are all like interplaying to converge to one thing, which is eye rubbing, and if you stop it again, it doesn't happen, because I would lose my job if it would.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I think this is what Dr. Rajesh Fogla said, that we don't have a machine to measure it, so probably we can build it one. That's the future. But there are mathematical modeling like this. Can you play the video, please? It's a short 30-second video which says that it's getting stronger. Do you agree to this or not? All mathematical modeling say you are a man of, you love mathematics, right?
Yeah.
So, and do you agree to this?
I love math, but the model is sometimes something you put what you want to. I mean, that's what I was trying to explain yesterday. My first model, I wanted to prove something which was against my conclusion, and then it led to the discovery of the cosine effect on the cornea. So, of course, if you create bonds in any tissue, it may work.
But you should believe in this because you have a PhD in mathematics.
Yeah, that's right. There's a life before and after this, by the way. I was reborn on the 12th of July last year was the second. There's my life. My life has started now, my new life since then. It was a great work, but yeah. Like Zonicky polynomials is a mathematical construction, which is not really...
That's mathematics.
Yeah.
This is also mathematics, so we should believe in this.
Have you noticed how much this guy has to fight to defend his theory? We can just lean back.
No, but we created functions to better describe a process. There's no prediction much.
How many of this in this crowd, I mean, have not started cross-linking, or you don't want to start cross-linking? If you can just lift your hand up. How many of you in this crowd do cross-linking?
Well, Rohit, this is not fair. Nobody from France is in the audience.
No, we have a lady from Georgia here. We have somebody from Arabia.
I have a question. We know that you're arguing that it doesn't really help cross-linking and there's no real proof, but we have cases where we have seen flattening up to 8 and 10 diopters. Right. So you are having some reversal. So if there is a chance
but it happens
flattening, why would you not want to take that
But
chance?
this flattening, how long it takes to happen? 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? Yeah. So I'm not saying it doesn't flatten. I'm just saying that the mechanism that it works may not be reticulation of the collagen, but more like a secondary wound healing. I have patients, they had like interstitial keratitis or herpes zoster, stromal immunological reaction. What happened to them is that they flattened by 8 diopters, like also 1 year later. I tell you another thing. Weakening of the cornea, when you do camera inlay implantation, you know, you make a 250 micron flap sometimes, put a foreign body in the cornea, and when you put the flap back, you expect the patient to see better, but what happens, like over time, they flatten also by 5 diopters in the center, and they have a hyperopic shift because of wound healing, probably similarly to what may happen in cross-linking over the time. If you would show me that once you have released the pedal of the UV light, there's a 7 diopter flattening on the cornea, which I would expect because it should work right now, then I would say cross-linking works. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't believe it could happen because how could just a photochemical reaction create a shape change so dramatic?
I understand now.
Yeah,
Maybe it's the mathematical mind that does not accept that there is more to the cornea and a whole cascade of reactions that modulate and that take time. And this is cell biology. This is not pure mathematics. This is not pure physics. This is the reaction of your body to. But on the other hand, Damien, why do we even care why it flattens? Medicine, as I said, is full of examples. We use it every day of treatments that we use that work.
They care because it flattens by 8 diopters. We would be happy it was 1 diopter, 2 diopters. So that is what the big challenge is. Why should it flatten 8 diopters?
Dr. Bellin has a point.
Yes.
2 things. One, I'll quote a mathematician who's not a physician, but Cynthia Roberts, well, we say the cornea is not a piece of plastic, but you're looking for a response of a piece of plastic. But I want to go back to a mathematical question. You alluded to earlier that these eye rubbers raise their pressure dramatically when it's a forcible rub. But raising intraocular pressure causes a surface tension. The surface tension is increased not at the steep part of the cornea, but at the flattest, which is Laplace's law. It's inversely related to the radius of curvature. Why, if that's the case, and that's a mathematical computation of surface tension related to pressure, do we see progression at the steepest part and not at the flattest part?
Oh, I tell you something. When people rub, something has been overlooked as well. It's the Bell's phenomenon. Because when you close your eye, the eyeball rotates up, and we have
but
good...
the pressure is going to be equal throughout the globe.
Right, but
so I want a really good answer, because if I don't have a good answer,
no.
I can't understand it, I can't follow it.
No,
what I'm saying is, we don't really know the answer.
No, but the effect
of... still believe in it.
No, but the effect of eye rubbing is plural. First, it exerts a direct pressure. It may increase the distension of fibrils. It may also push the extracellular matrix aside, so explaining the local focal thinning that you observe first. But you never know really much where the actual trauma occurs because it's very complicated. If it's a grinding movement, it may be everywhere on the flat, on the steep. The Bell's phenomenon plays a role. And we have now the thinking, but because we don't have many observations, that those keratoconus who look like pellucid marginal degeneration, which are very thin inferiorly, are occurring in patients who rub like inferiorly with a very marked Bell's phenomenon. And we have patients who have not only a very inferior thinning and deformation, but iris iridoschisis, which is the iris fiber distortion. We have a case on our website. When you look at the slit lamp, you see the iris is distorted at the place where the patient rubs, and it's very close to the thinnest point of the cornea, which is very inferior.
So this is all anecdotal.
Damien, this is the cross-linking debate.
Yeah,
not
but
the
that's very important.
That was 20 minutes ago.
No, I know, but everything's connected.
Okay.
I mean, when you say science, we don't care how it works, and but that's how science progresses, by people who challenge a why question, and then people discover a satellite phenomena which leads to a progress. You are quoting Einstein, and you apply the opposite reasoning. He developed the theory because he observed that the answers, people would not really question the world, and he had a further question because he was not satisfied with the current mechanism of the Newtonian physics at that time. And that's my point. I'm not saying I'm Einstein or Newton, I'm just Gatinel, but I'm telling you that, again, if a procedure works, which is not the debate, my point is that cross-linking may not stiffen the cornea, and when we discover why, we may develop a real corneal strengthening procedure that will work. But as long as we satisfy ourselves with like uncertainties, I don't think we do a good job.
But I like what Dr. Fogler said. Necessity is mother of all invention. We are not seeing a change. Maybe because it's not that it's not happening, may or may not, because we're not able to measure it. So you and I think with Brad Randleman groups have started working on Brilliant microscopy. We are also fortunate to get a grant which got approved, Indo-Netherlands grant, to build our own Brilliant microscopy. So we will invite you next year.
Oh, great.
And we will show you if Brilliant microscopy works.
Okay.
But we already did, Rohit. We showed the data 3 months ago and it's submitted.
On the
LASIK
patient?
extra. Patients have been started to be measured at USC. Yeah.
The challenge of Brilliant microscopy, I think he would also agree, is the present generation one takes a hell a lot of it, and it's slow, it's not repeatable, and it's got its problem. Am I right?
Yeah, I hope you can show it, because I was at Arvo and I was browsing the poster, and there's a rerun study, but it was on refractive surgery, and the fellow asked, of course you've done cross-linking evaluation. She said, yes, I did, and say, what did you see? She said, we are still working on it. Say, but did you see any strengthening? She said, not really, but we have only 20 patients, so we are waiting to include more. And the second thing is because I like your Einstein thing. At the time of Einstein, people were thinking that emptiness cannot exist, so the universe would be plunged into what they call the ether, right? And they've made so many measurements to measure that ether, until people like Einstein say, no, there's no ether, because, and people will say, oh, instruments doesn't work, we cannot measure ether, and emptiness is impossible. Emptiness has been shown to be possible after like centuries of people trying. Brilliant people like Newton believed in ether, Descartes believed in ether, many people until Einstein and maybe a few others would decided that because we can't measure it, finally we have to admit there's maybe no ether. So maybe they are not.
So with this reasoning,
yes,
you wouldn't have given any penicillin in 1952 because it took another 20 years to decipher the mechanism. You would have had everybody die of an infection because penicillin's mechanism was not elucidated. That's exactly the same.
No, I know, but penicillin goal is to kill a germ. If you take germs like in a box and you put penicillin, they die.
Yeah, but the effect was not measurable and was not explained.
No, it was measurable, but because it
well,
was
we measure
working.
too. We measure an arrest in ectasia. You can say that washing your hands prevents even more people from dying than taking penicillin, and you are right.
Maybe.
And this is why eye rubbing is a trigger. It is an important trigger. Nobody defies it.
We'll go back to ectasia. For post-LASIK ectasia, we know that sometimes they can progress rapidly. And yes, eye rubbing may be a factor, but it may not be. So do you believe even post-LASIK ectasia is essentially eye rubbing, or these are different and these would probably qualify for a cross-linking?
Yeah, based on my observation, and we have had many cases lately, especially the late onset ectasia, because there are two ectasia types. The one which is completely unpredicted, like you showed yesterday, and the one which before the surgery you could see like the cornea was not good. And the other very important point which leads to this ectasia thing, in my theory of rubbing giving keratoconus, is that it explains all the missing links, all the broad spectrum of subtle deformation. If you have patients with asymmetric bow tie, subtle ones, ask them, and they will tell you that they rub, but not so much, and usually they use this, which is not as detrimental as the thing. So you can correlate subtle deformation. So my point is that if you have a patient who traumatized this cornea chronically and you do LASIK, it's a second hit which is accelerating the biomechanical decompensation. If you have a patient, my patient with ectasia, usually they have a good, they sleep on the side, they develop ectasia, they rub more the eye on which they developed ectasia. So
you can ask something.
I don't do cross-linking after ectasia, I just say stop to the rubbing and it works. And again, I don't want to have problems. If it wouldn't work, I wouldn't do it.
We'll take one last question and break for lunch.
No, it's not a question, it's actually a comment. Okay, I'm just trying to be very objective here. It just bothers me a bit that Dr. Hafezi is saying that because cross-linking is something which we are not so sure about, but because it's working, right? So we should continue, plot on, and try to find evidence to show that it works. Is that what you're saying?
Could you say it again, please?
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm saying is I'm just a bit bothered.
Dr. Chan is co-editor of defeatkeratoconus.com, by the way. She's not partial.
Okay, but that's not fair.
It's public knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but, well, I'm co-editor because I think I believe in what is being mentioned in the website. But basically, it bothers me. I mean, to be very scientific, I think it's important to be very objective here. So you're saying that because Panadol works and in the past or currently nobody knows how it's working, or penicillin for many, many years, no one knew how it worked. But eventually, we all use it right now. So you're saying that for cross-linking, we should actually go along the same path and invest and carry on doing this procedure simply because we are seeing an effect in some patients, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, but the problem with this kind of mentality is sometimes you will close your mind to what may be an alternative treatment for keratoconus, all right?
May I just respectfully remind you that 18 years ago, we opened our minds so far that we established an out-of-the-box thinking that almost crucified us the first years. The first years, I was standing where Damien is right now, and people were shouting at us, how do we dare put UV light on a cornea? And this is why, although we have a very tough debate, I like what you're doing because provocative thinking is what we need. This is where I fully agree.
Okay, but what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying that cross-linking doesn't work, but I think it's very important for all of us to open our minds to the fact that it may not work the way you intend it to, so that scientifically your mind is open to other pathways. So I don't think you should actually dismiss what Damien is saying, because he may be right. You may be right, he may be right, because at the moment there's no concrete evidence that cross-linking actually stiffens the cornea. What we see, what we know, is that it flattens the cornea, and that may be because the epithelium is removed. That's why epi-off cross-linking is more effective than epi-on. In fact, when you do an epithelial removal, because of modulation of the healing of the epithelium, there's natural flattening, which is why the flattening occurs over time and not immediately. So I think it's very important to open our minds to alternative pathways and alternative
That's
means.
the reason we have been last 2 days, last 24 hours, we've been discussing a lot of probably alternative pathways of healing.
For me, I'm not like Damien. I do not totally not do cross-linking. So this is how I manage my patients with keratoconus. So when they come to see me, I'll interrogate very, very carefully about eye rubbing history. All right, and in fact, many of them rub their eyes. In fact, most of them. Initially, some of them may not realize the fact that they're rubbing, but eventually when you interrogate them long enough, they will tell you they're rubbing. There are some patients, despite what you do, you refer them to an ocular disease specialist, you give them anti-inflammatory drugs, anti-mast cell inhibitors, they still cannot stop rubbing their eyes, and the keratoconus progresses, I will cross-link them. And somehow cross-linking, does desensitize the eye, and some of them find that within the first few months after cross-linking, because they're afraid to touch the eye, this habit of rubbing gradually, they stay away from it. Okay, so I have changed my practice of managing keratoconus in a way, maybe because it's his influence.
So you're applying.
There are valid points that he's bringing up.
You're applying an empiric approach, but I think, unfortunately, after all these years and the overwhelming evidence, it's up to you to give us the proof in the pudding. Show us why your theory is correct, and I will be the first to adopt it. And I think of all congresses I visit throughout the year, this congress is the one that needs the least reminder of being open and innovative and open to new ideas.
With time, this thing about eye rubbing, you say it's anecdotal, that's true, but with time, it may be possible to prove it eventually, but we need to open our minds to it. I think that's the most important thing.
Take-home point is we open the minds, come back again, and find what's new.
Exactly.
And last thing, the biggest challenge for us about this new technology, Brilliant, is as a friend of French, I want you to tell us how do you pronounce? Because it's a French word and each one pronounces it and we don't know French.
Okay, wait, so we can do all together. So we say,
because
brillant, brillant, brillant. Briouin. No, but you know, I knew how to say it, but because now people are saying it with other accent, it's difficult for me to say it in French now. I'm saying like more Briouin or Briouin, but it's Briouin. And I would like also to just add something, not to extend the debate, but just to thank you, Rohit, and thank you, Farhad, for being very open-minded to create this debate, because it's not everywhere that you can. Yeah, but I know many colleagues, they are like, they don't want to listen things that may not go with their way of thinking, and I think you are very great colleagues, and what you do in your fields, both of you, is remarkable, and I will always admire you for this, but the fact that you can also accept contradiction and challenging is even the step further, and thank you for having these things.
Thank you. And also, sur le handshake. Merci.
Let's have